I figured that this type of video could definitely get me in a little bit of trouble with some of my viewers, as people have never uniquely or predominantly seen Xenoblade Chronicles as one of those franchises that are on the upper echelon of RPG gaming. You have franchises like Final Fantasy and also Persona that kind of sit at the top of the food chain when it comes to Japanese RPGs. And Xenoblade has always been seen, at least recently, as more of that lower tier type of franchise. And I think that with the release of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and of course the Metacritic scores and the huge buzz and trending and things that you see online, it looks like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has kind of vaulted itself into the conversation of this. And as someone who's been playing RPGs for 30 plus years now at this point, and I've been playing a ton of the recent best RPGs, and as I descend into the 30 plus hour range, almost 40 hour range of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and honestly just still getting going, I think that there's something that is very apparently clear to me as I play through this game, and this is something that's more than special. This is something that's developing to me into something that really hasn't been matched when it comes to any feeling that I've ever had playing a Japanese RPG recently, or at least in the modern times. I haven't gotten this feeling in quite some time from a major release. And I just think that with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I think it might have surpassed Final Fantasy in my opinion, and I'm gonna go over a number of reasons why. But before we get into any of that, what's good everyone? OJ here. Welcome back to another video. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, and click that notification bell to get my videos first. Now, first of all, let's not sit here and trash Final Fantasy. I think that Final Fantasy is an incredible franchise. It's one of the reasons why I love RPGs. Final Fantasy 6 is one of my favorite games of all time. Final Fantasy 7 is one of my favorite games of all time as well. I love those two games, and I've loved various other Final Fantasy games and spin-offs over the years. So Final Fantasy is a majestic and legendary franchise that I never want to see stop at some point. So let's just make that very clear. But I think that with a lot of the recent releases, with Final Fantasy 15, which wasn't that recent, but one of the more recent Final Fantasies, Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and kind of how they're handling that, and now what I'm playing with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I've had more fun in the first 30 plus hours of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 than I've had playing a Final Fantasy new end game in a very long time. Like, I can't recall the last time I had this much fun, or at least at all. Maybe Final Fantasy 6 on the Super Nintendo, Final Fantasy 3 here in America, but Final Fantasy 6 normally, I don't think I've ever had this much fun. And to be honest, I don't think that experience is even close with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 as I go through this. There are so many different things in this game that just make me say, wow, I can't believe I just did that. I can't believe that cinematic just happened. The story is just ramping up. The emotional tone is just grabbing you. It is absolutely incredible to see what is going on with this. And I wish I was saying, oh, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. Maybe this is not necessarily the case. Maybe the hype has gotten me. But I sat on this video. I've been playing Xenoblade Chronicles just straight. Ever since it launched, I've been playing it and playing it and playing it. And I was thinking this earlier, but then I'm like, no, wait a minute. It's still here. I thought it'd maybe go away. Maybe I'd run into some parts in Xenoblade 3 that are just terrible, but it just keeps ramping up. And I think it's safe for me to say that, yeah, I think it might have surpassed it, especially when you look at a number of things with the story aspects of the game and how the storytelling works and how more, I would say, clear or legible it is to understand and grasp the story as you go along, and how they did it with Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I think that the structure and the amount of content is nothing to be scoffed at. Now, when I played Final Fantasy 7 Remake, which is a fantastic game, it almost felt like it was over before it started. It was kind of short, and yes, it had side content and it had things to do, and Final Fantasy 7 Remake Intergrade is also phenomenal. But by the 30-hour mark in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I was still just getting going with the game. There were still tutorials being played, and yes, I did side content and grinding and cooking and gem crafting and other things to kind of take up some of that time, but it feels like it was so much more of a traditional RPG with a ton of modern elements packed onto it, more so than what you've seen with Final Fantasy games that seem to be graphical showcases that try to appeal to certain types of audiences that maybe aren't into JRPGs as much, and then they layer on some of those other mechanics. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is uniquely a Japanese RPG, and they're not trying to be anything else. They're just trying to be that, and it really shows when you play through the game and the content. It really does. Now, the amount of content is somewhat even overwhelming. The game size and the world is just so vast. From what Monolith Soft has said, it's 5 times larger than Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was already a massive game to begin with. So now you have a true connected open world back again in a Xenoblade experience on the Nintendo Switch. Then on top of that, you have such good structure, storytelling, side quests, and everything. It feels like that old school adventure that I used to play back in the day before there was open world, quote unquote, but there was just so much content, and it let you play around and have all that meaty side content and not take you through hoops and hurdles and weird things in order for it to happen, kind of like how Final Fantasy games do. The structure of Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example, is completely wonky because they're trying to follow a little bit of what happened with the Final Fantasy VII original game, but then they're trying to do new things, but then there's weird segments kind of put in there that try to play like a JRPG at times, but then it's not. I mean, I think that it's just one of those things that I thought about this, right? I thought about it, and I feel like the structure of what Xenoblade Chronicles 3 does and how the game progresses is just a superior way of how I like to play Japanese RPGs just in general. So another thing that I'd like to say, because I think that like Final Fantasy has some of the best music and presentation that we will see, and I think that that's where Xenoblade, maybe on the music side, the presentation wasn't quite there, but on the music side, it could have definitely been up there in the ranks. But Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to me actually puts together the presentation with the music in a higher quality package to actually challenge what Final Fantasy can do, and I think that this game finally got that there. A lot of the effects that happen on screen, a lot of like the break and the topple and all that looks so much more better presented and so much more cool when you do them. How the break flashes on the screen, how the topple flashes on the screen, the launch and everything, how they have the meters to where you can see, and the timing of it. It really just takes the presentation along with the music and sound effects and quality to the next level, and I think that's what was missing a little bit in the Xenoblade franchise over the years. It felt a little bit lower quality on the complex mechanics of there, where Final Fantasy always felt higher quality on the mechanics that they implement. I think Xenoblade Chronicles has caught up to Final Fantasy. Now remember, I'm not saying graphics completely, because obviously the graphics in Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 7 Remake are obviously better than Xenoblade Chronicles 3, but I think if you take into consideration the scope and the size of the game and the content and everything that was packed in to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I think that yes, overall as a whole, the music presentation and what was laid out there is definitely up there, if not surpassing what I've seen. Now, I've talked about this just a little bit, and the storytelling and the cinematics. I think that Final Fantasy over the years has been quite convoluted in terms of how they do things, and just not quite as good as maybe it used to be. And I feel that with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, they've taken it to the next level with the writing and the cinematics and the storytelling. Yes, they kind of blurt, weird battle sayings over and over. It can be kind of corny and all of that. But when you're talking about what is written down in the cutscenes and what plays out and how the cinematics all kind of work out with your choreographed scenes and everything, it's right up there with the best in the industry, especially with Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Fighting some of the first bosses with Mobius and everything in the game is just nuts. It is on another level with some of these cutscenes, and we've seen it with the trailers and everything, but actually watching it in motion with the voice acting and getting full context of what's happening, is just incredible. It honestly is incredible, and I'm stunned every time that I go to a new chapter, every time that I see something new. It just stuns me how good everything actually is laid out and put in this game. So it's something to me that is definitely caught up, if not surpassed, Final Fantasy in many different ways. Now, this is probably one of the biggest things here, and probably some, I would say, budding opinions, but to me, the battle system's uniqueness and upgrades. Like, if anything, a lot of RPGs, obviously, they take something and they do an evolution of it, and I think that they do certain things to make it fun or unique in there. But Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has done something that I don't think any RPG in the modern end has done, which is take what they've done before, but then also layer on top like 3 or 4 different things that you wouldn't expect to be possible, especially running on the Nintendo Switch hardware. So not only did they make the world 5 times bigger, but then they also added to where you can have 7 characters on screen fighting at one time, and you can switch between each one of those characters at any point, whether you're in battle or out of battle, and then also class change between all of those characters. Like, you just don't see that. There isn't any Final Fantasy game that gives you that type. Console Final Fantasy game, obviously Final Fantasy 14 online, that's a very different type of thing, but I'm talking about the console Final Fantasies. You don't see anything like that. If anything, sometimes they've removed the amount of characters, or they've kind of limited exactly what you can do, or it takes updates to add in some of those things. But to see that, it's just incredible. In a massive open world with seamless battles that just happen right then and there, that you can run from at any time and then hop into another battle. I think that is probably one of the most impressive things with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that makes me say, okay, this game has surpassed it in my eyes. I didn't expect that they'd be able to pull it off at first as well as it is. Yes, it gets a little bit cluttered on the screen, but when you really understand the system and start understanding how to fight and everything, and you get your Uroburos and you start doing different things, you realize how seamless and how awesome the battle system really comes together. So it's something that, in my opinion, is where Xenoblade has kind of surpassed Final Fantasy in many different ways, with that open world, with those different mechanics, the fact that they added in 7 characters that can be on the screen fighting at a time with a bunch of different enemies. I mean, it's just incredible. And once again, we haven't really seen that, despite we have these huge, big, powerful systems coming out, right? But we haven't seen any other Japanese RPGs even attempt to do something that close to that. Maybe the new Star Ocean game, I think that's going to be something, but there hasn't really been anything, you know, when it comes to PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 that has done it on this quality of a level. So to me, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has definitely caught up, if not surpassed, Final Fantasy in many different aspects. And I think that this is a good thing, because once again, competition and having more high quality franchises that can score what Xenoblade has scored, right? In the high 80s, you know, low 90s, somewhere in that type of range. That's what we need. That's what we need for Japanese RPGs. Monolith Soft has gotten a hit on their hands. This is their best rated game since the original Xenoblade Chronicles a decade or so ago. So to me, this is something that was absolutely needed, and I'm happy that we can even have this conversation, because I would have never had this conversation before. Maybe a little bit when the original Xenoblade Chronicles came out, but it was new. I mean, it didn't stack up to the history and legacy that the Final Fantasy franchise has, and it still doesn't overall, because Final Fantasy's just been around for way longer. But now with the number of games under their belt, and with this type of rating with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and this type of game, I think that it's safe to say that, yeah, we can talk about it now. We can have this type of conversation. But that is just my opinion. What do you guys think about this? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and we will see you for the next video. Peace.